Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My pleasure to introduce you tonight to Ashley Waters, who I think has a really interesting background. She was a candidate in the last provincial election. She's been recently named as one of Niagara's top 40 under 40. She has got a interesting background that we'll go through a little bit in the future in convention center sales and marketing, and as an entrepreneur, and successfully running fundraiser campaigns for something called, what is it? Pink what?
Pink Pearl Canada. So it helps young women affected by cancer. And so at the time, I was my mother's caregiver while she was going through cancer. And the programs are amazing. You find a lot of support. And during a time when you don't feel like you have much control, it's really great to have a network. And I was able to pull together some really great family friends, and we were able to fundraise, and we did the walk in support of my mom. And I've been involved with Pink Pearl ever since.
Awesome. And tell me, what was it like running in the last provincial election?
It was a roller coaster. It was one of the greatest rides of my life, I say. I learned a lot going into it. You really don't understand that you have to be an entrepreneur. It really is your own kind of brand, that you're trying to stay on party brand, but you're also trying to find yourself and get that word out in your community. And so my story and kind of how that started, I took political science honors. And one night, my husband and I were watching TVO, and we were watching Steve Paikin, and Stephen Del Duca was a guest. And that was in the spring in 2021. And he was calling for parity at Queen's Park. And he was looking for female candidates in their 30s. And I thought, that's me. I was 36 at the time. And I said to my husband, I'm going to reach out. I'm going to contact them. And I'm going to say, here I am. If you want me here. So nothing really came of it. It was a couple months later. And then I heard from someone from the nominating committee, and I had an interview, and I kind of started the process. And from there, I was kind of led to different people. I would get a different name to kind of contact through my, city, different councilmen. I even spoke to my mayor before I decided to run. And it was really important for me to put myself forward because, as I just mentioned, my mom had experienced breast cancer during the pandemic, and I was her caregiver. And we were navigating the health system at the time, which was very frustrating, with making sure she could get her surgery, make sure she could get her treatment locally. And if, I wasn't there, I don't know what would have happened because, we really had to advocate. And she had a great support system and doctors, and she's doing very well now.
Good.
So
I'm glad.
So, right. And at that time I was working full time, and
now you were working with Scouts Canada. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So tell me what you're doing with Scouts Canada.
So I'm a nonprofit manager, and I've been with Scouts Canada for 13 years this month. So I just celebrated my anniversary there, and I'm a home office based. And so when my mom was going through treatments, the kids were off school because of the online schooling. And I was just really frustrated. And I thought, if, I want to change, I'm going to have to be that change. I'm going to have to put myself forward. I have this opportunity to run. And that was really why I put myself out there. And I really wanted to affect some change in the community.
Well, congratulations on putting your name on the ballot. That's great.
Thank you.
Will you do it again?
That's the question I keep receiving. I really want to see who we pick as a party leader. And I want to make sure that we're clear about what we stand for, what sets us apart from the other parties here. I hesitate to say that our policies were so convoluted that many people didn't understand. I feel like we had some great policies in there. And, I was part of a stakeholder team that we looked at post-secondary and skills and trades. And I was really happy with what we put forward as part of our platform. However, a lot of that platform kind of fell on deaf ears with, the electorate and what we were trying to get across. And I feel like it came out too late. And it was so much for us to kind of do in our debates and really learn and speak to the talking points that, we didn't have that slogan of get it done like Doug Ford did. And so anytime we went to debates, I, for one, didn't find it difficult because I was just showing up with the NDP member because none of the Conservative members were coming at the time to do right. And so that was kind of my tagline, that it was the most important job interview of your life. And if you don't show up for it, you normally don't get the job.
But they still won.
Exactly. And that was the most frustrating part, I would say, is during
Okay,
the
so let me
process.
ask you a question, because you were on the front line. You were knocking on doors. You were going to these debates. Did
Right.
the Ontario Liberal Party's policies not resonate? Or did
It was a
leader,
mix.
or did
I
the leader
heard
not resonate?
and see, that's what I heard at the door. People would talk about Stephen's looks. It was always off point, because if someone was saying something that was deprecating towards him, I would say, it's not like everyone can be a Justin Trudeau, and some people are looking for that. Some people are looking for this certain charisma that sometimes is unattainable for most of us mortal humans, that if you put yourself out there, they're getting off point. Even for myself, people would nitpick if I wore makeup, if I dressed a certain way, if I was wearing a hoodie at the doors. It was kind of funny
They would
because
nitpick if you were wearing
completely.
makeup or a hoodie at the doors?
Absolutely. If I could do the job, because I had young kids, because my kids would come and canvas with us, and I have a 9-year-old and an 11-year-old. And so the things that people will just say, it doesn't shock me now, but at the time, it's just completely off base. And people would want a civics lesson really at the door, because they don't understand the levels of government. And so when I became a candidate, at the time, there was no vaccination cards. There was no convoy. There was none of those things happen prior. And then all of a sudden you're in an election and all this stuff is happening. And so when you would speak to people, they were angry. And a lot of that anger was directed towards the federal government. But when you're having the conversations at the door and you're trying to explain it's a provincial election and you're saying who you're representing, who the leader would be, that was the time suck, really. And whether or not I, as a female in my 30s, could do the job, who is going to look after my kids?
Okay, so let me ask you the question.
Right?
Stephen Del Duca had this thing about 30 under 30. He
Right.
wanted a lot of young people to run. You're a female in your 30s. Clearly the Liberal Party was trying to position itself to attract younger voters, female voters, etc. And some people would say, no, that you need some people to be elected that have, got more lived experience, that have met a payroll. You've heard all the lines.
Right.
Do you think you were a credible candidate?
I do, because I'm a paying taxpayer. I have children that go to school. I have parents that are, needing that medical care. I have grandparents that are in homes, right? And so there's all these things that are at the provincial election, level that people are voting towards. And having a young family, wanting quality jobs, wanting healthcare, those are all things that, I can speak to. And so when you're at the door, you're really trying to make sure you're giving them that quick elevator pitch, but you're getting across the point that they should care too. They should care enough to want to have the quality jobs, the healthcare, the education, and stay on point. And most of the time, people weren't worried about that.
What were they worried about?
They were just worried about whether or not they could have, a buck of beer. They wanted this, they wanted the quick and easy. I feel like the media wasn't even so much on our side, I would say, because a lot of the stories that we would break, they weren't picked up on. And even though Stephen was out doing news conferences or we were out doing debates, I feel like it really fell on deaf ears. Like for myself here in Niagara, I broke the story about amalgamation, that it was coming and nobody picked up on it at all. And so we were all waiting for all the mayors to pipe in and to have this big story and for it to have a triple and a ripple effect, and nothing came of it. And there was other things along the way that happened that way too. And it was just astonishing. Sorry, go ahead.
I must have missed something. Has Niagara amalgamated?
So with the strong mayor orders, it was along the lines of that. It was along the lines of whether or not they were going to take the councils, make it smaller with the regions, and whether that was coming.
Well,
right?
I did see a statistic at one point in time that said Niagara was one of the most governed areas in all of Canada. And there's as many people in Niagara on the lake and Niagara Falls as there is in one ward in Toronto. So, maybe some amalgamation might make sense.
And hey, I get that when it comes to our transit system and for the, municipalities working together, I'm all in agreement for that. I'm not against that, but that was with each township having a say, right? Instead of it being during like the Toronto election and all of a sudden half council's wiped out just because, right? So I think there's different models to look at when you're, taking a stance on whether or not you're for or against. I'm not completely against it, but if it makes sense and if there's that buy-in and if there's that representation from your community to have a voice in a say.
It'd be nice to have, a voice, a local voice. I guess the problem I've got is that often the institutional inertia of people where they know that half of them are going to lose jobs. And, when you got,
Right.
what is it? Niagara, Lake, St. Catharines, and Welland. So of the 4 mayors, there might be more. Is there a mayor in Thorough too?
There's 12. There's 12 municipalities that
12
make up the
municipalities.
Niagara region.
11 of them are going to lose their job.
Right.
And there's only going to be one
Right.
if you have amalgamation.
Right. So that was one
institutional
of the
inertia is a
Right.
problem. And, I think Hamilton is merged, amalgamated. London has amalgamated. Ottawa has amalgamated. Toronto has amalgamated. It's worked reasonably well elsewhere.
And we would hear the opposite from some of the police services and from EMS. So they're different models, right? And their service delivery and how that looks. So that all comes into play. I'm just using it as one of the examples that really didn't take off, right? It wasn't something that anybody else really followed up on, talked about at the time. And it was just one example of many, right? That we know whether we're looking at for-profit homes or not for-profit homes, what was happening during COVID, trying to make sure that we had policy that wouldn't happen again, whether we're talking about ODSP, whether we're talking about education, mental health was a huge issue. Every single stakeholder call that we had, people talked about mental health as being
mental
focus.
health was a big issue.
Oh, absolutely. Every single time that we had a call, and it's a ripple effect in your community. And instead of mental health being under our health minister, I found out it was spread amongst 13 different portfolios with funding, and it was under tourism and sport. So there was a lot of things along the way of running that I found out that otherwise I wouldn't have. And I don't think the general public really understands or knows.
We're chatting tonight with Ashley Waters. She was a candidate in the last provincial election. She won an award for one of the top 40 under 40. She's an executive, nonprofit executive with Scouts Canada. She's a really interesting, articulate young lady. And so we're going to take a break and come back and ask her some hard-hitting policy questions and see how she answers them. Stay with us, everyone. This is fun. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight with Ashley Waters. She's an interesting young lady. She was a candidate for the Ontario Liberal Party in the last provincial election. She won an award for one of the top 40 under 40 in the Niagara area. She's a nonprofit manager with Scouts Canada. She was a founding advisory panel member of something called Next Niagara that was working on the workforce planning board in the YMCA in Niagara, and she was a council member of something called Niagara Connects, which was Niagara-wide network of people for collaboration, etc. She's got a bachelor's in political science from Brock University, and as I mentioned, she in addition, you were a travel soccer coach with Niagara Falls Soccer Club, fun, and a team captain for Pink Pearl Canada. So a fascinating background. And again, Ashley, thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate it. So we were talking about the fact that you were under 40, in your 30s, running for politics. And the Liberal Party had its worst, if not maybe second worst, but either the worst or the second worst showing in history. Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, likes to say that the whole Liberal caucus could fit into a minivan. There was, however, a sizable turnout at the recent convention that you had in Hamilton, and lots of interest in the potential upcoming leadership convention. Where do you think the Liberal Party in Ontario is right now? Is it destined for a comeback, or is it just about to die?
I'm an optimist, and I think having 1,500 people present in Hamilton during a storm and being able to be in those sessions and voting on amendments, and you could see the excitement. and you could go to a hospitality suite and you could hear people talking about where they'd like us to go, what leader should be that considering, or what we should go in which direction. And we passed one member, one vote, which is huge because that will grow our membership. It will make it more inclusive. It will make sure that everyone has a say in the leader that we're choosing. And that wasn't something that happened in 2018. And I think many people were frustrated by that. And this just allows more people to come on and have that diversity, have equity, and make sure that we're represented. And Brian Johns did an amazing job. He was a great president, and he helped me so much running as a candidate. He could see that there was frustrations, locally. I feel like we have a lot of bottlenecks with some PLAs, and that's not all with our, local associations, but we have to start treating them more inclusive instead of like private country clubs that people get to have a meeting with who they like each month. And we really have to look at doing the hard work of bringing people on that look different around the table, that have a different lived experience, that really represent your community and represent Ontarians. We're missing that. And a lot of females that were young, like myself, it was hard for us because people didn't want to fund us. They didn't want to give the money that was supposed to be built up over that time period of the 4 years for the next candidate. And many of us got I don't want to say defeated, but it was just an extra layer that we weren't anticipating. We thought that, other parties were going to be what we were going up against. We thought we were just going to have to worry about the Conservatives or the NDPs. We didn't think we'd have to worry about, we thought a Liberal was a Liberal. And
so you didn't get a lot of support from the existing Liberal Party organization in Niagara?
So for myself, I wouldn't say that's for all, but there were certain key members that made it more difficult than it needed to be. And that was something that happened to many other females that ran. And there was 60% of us, there were female candidates. It was historic, but it was totally different than what was the norm, right?
Well, let me ask you about, where the current positioning is of the parties, if I could. In the last couple of weeks, there's been a bunch of commentary about the provincial budget, and some of the big Toronto newspapers called it a Kathleen Wynne-like budget, and that Ford, the Conservatives, the progressive Conservatives provincially, have really governed either from the center or from a progressive side of center. Kathleen Wynne budget, if that's an apt description, would suggest it's actually to the left of center, and the NDP, if anything, a move to the right, to the center. Is the Liberal Party been crowded out? Is there any room for a Liberal Party in the political spectrum? You said that there was confusion over what Stephen Del Duca stood for. Part of it was that it wasn't that much different than either the NDP or the Progressive Conservatives, was it?
I think that the confusion lies in the fact that NDP and Liberal were pitted against each other. So the messaging in the media that was taken up most of the time was that. So the focus wasn't on Ford, right? The focus was on, well, we can win over an NDP leader, so vote for us, or different messages when you had that opportunity were getting convoluted because you weren't sticking on point. Like our messaging, most of the people didn't know the slogan. Like it wasn't something that was really quick and easy, right? It wasn't like a catchphrase. What
was the slogan? I don't even remember.
Right? It was your choice. It was it was your choice. It was basically your choice. There was many choices that you could make out of the policy that would make it easier for you and your loved ones. And hey, we had a great slate of candidates that represented different industries, different lived experiences. We had great policies. That all came out too late, and people didn't understand the platform in time. And by the time that, it was time to vote, there was voter apathy. Like we see, it was the lowest voter turnout. People were not coming out to the polls. And then we saw it even more so in our municipal elections, right? So at the point that I was making prior, when I was canvassing and people were at the door, they were just angry and they were defeated. And I don't think pollsters help whatsoever, because most of those polls were from 2018 when they would show that there was a huge lead And many people thought, well, I'm not going to go out to vote. And I would call them on it. I would say, you're projecting something that hasn't even happened. You're showing old stats. And I really think that many people, once they see that someone has a huge lead, they think on the voter day, I'm not going to go. I'm just going to not.
So is that a
waste my vote.
problem with our political system and the first past the post system?
Yeah. Well, we won the popular vote and we don't even have party status. So clearly, I think that there's, something that should be looked at. And many people don't understand. They wouldn't even understand how do you go about changing it?
So Justin Trudeau in his last, in his original election said this will be the last election under first past the post. Dalton McGuinty back, numerous years ago when he was premier, actually at one point in time had said he's in support of proportional representation and did a referendum on it, but then campaigned against it. So what should happen with our system of voting?
Definitely a change. I think like you're talking about the ward system even, right? Like that doesn't even happen within Niagara. We're not under a ward system. It's really tricky because you want to have the representation. Different city centers like Toronto are so dense that you really have to look at that because they usually would swing the vote. And I think that's why a lot of policy is framed with an urban setting in mind. Our rural people really feel siloed because it's like an afterthought when we're making policy, which is totally unfair. Yeah. And really, we should look at that with a different lens because, agriculture and our farmers, like that is the backbone of Ontario and especially within the Niagara region.
So let's come through some of the current policies and see if you've got a quick response to them. Bill 23 and affordable housing. It's all about trying to make municipalities deal with applications for housing more quickly and getting rid of development fees and restrictions on people opposing developments to the Ontario Land Tribunal. What do you think of that? Is that a good strategy that the progressive conservatives have put forward or a bad one?
We definitely need homes. There's a supply and a demand issue. We need the workers. We don't need to use the green belts. We need to make sure that we're not swapping one set of soil for another that doesn't make sense, especially here within Niagara. Once our rich soil is done, like you can't just grow grapes or a certain crop the same way that you can if they're trying to say, well, you can have this plot of land. It doesn't work like that. And it really does affect certain species when you're looking at wetlands and the studies that are done. And that's why most people think that red tape or they're trying to hold up something, but it really has an impact. And for sustainability, let's do it where it makes sense. Let's look at building up. Like not everybody can have that urban setting, and we have to figure out where it makes sense and to rezone certain areas if we need to.
Okay, healthcare. Healthcare is going to take an increasing portion of the budget as the baby boom ages. Long-term care is as well. The provincial government is talking about potentially experimenting with some private surgical centers and things like that. What do you think of the Conservative government's policies on healthcare?
They're going to marginalize more people that can't afford the services in the first place. So really attacking the nurses, the frontline workers by capping the wages, especially after COVID, when those were our heroes. And all of a sudden the smack in the face is, well, that's not going to go up. Your salary is not going to go up. You're burnt out. Well, that's too bad. A lot of nurses leaving for the private sector. Yes. Going even to the States, right? Like we're a border town. A lot of people I know leaving to go because they can make more money crossing the border. We have to make something that is sustainable and makes sense. We can build these hospitals, but if we don't have people to be staffed in them, what is going to be the point? And, closing down our emergency rooms, which kept happening, especially this past winter here in Welland and Coburn, it affected people. Like people couldn't make it to the emergency room, and it's not so accessible for everybody just to be able to get onto a highway and go. We had those storms that happened. And it's really looking at it with a lens of how do we make credentialing faster? How do we bring more people here? How do we make it affordable for them to buy homes and stay? So it's just such a ripple effect that we really have to make sure that we're bringing talented people here and making it easy for them to set up and have quality jobs and a great life.
What's the biggest issue provincially in the Niagara region right now?
Inflation, the cost of groceries, the cost of rent. It's so hard for families. Our project share, people that would be the ones donating are now the ones going for assistance. It really has made so many people are affected, and many people I even know are affected this way.
So the Bank of Canada is dramatically increasing interest rates to combat that. At the same time, both the federal and the provincial government are running huge deficits, which is really, contributing to inflation. Do you think the government should be reducing spending and decreasing the size of the deficits to effectively fight inflation as well?
Well, I'm not an economist. However, I think it's great that they're giving grocery rebates. I think it's great that there's certain breaks that we're getting or tax incentives. However, real people want real fast solutions. And the fact that, these large grocery chains are making huge profits and they're saying they can't help but to increase the costs. I think it's more of government kind of stepping in and looking at how we make that fair and accessible for people to be able to go into the stores and be able to afford. And it's just so many factors. There's the war in Ukraine that's made it hard for, shipping trades. So it's not just one silver bullet solution.
I used to be a political consultant and advised a bunch of different candidates. And one of the things I said is that you got to have a really good, not elevator speech, but front door speech about why I should vote for you. So Ashley Waters, tell me, please, why should I vote for you?
I'm passionate about community and advocating for those that feel like they don't have a voice, and to making things better. So that way we can live here, our kids can live here, our grandkids can live here, and really have quality education, quality jobs, and quality healthcare.
Ashley Waters, thank you so much for joining us and telling us a little bit about you and about the Ontario Liberal Party and about policies and why we should vote for you. It's a real pleasure meeting you.
Thank you. It was great speaking with you.
And good luck.
Thank you.
I hope you put your name forward again. We're going to take a break and come back with another conversation in just 2 minutes. Stay with us.